Welcome to the Writer Reads Mack and Me, an Odyssey. Book 2, Mack and Me, Blaedergil's Host. Chapter 13, Recovery. How do you feel? Mack's voice greeted me as I surfaced, but it sounded from inside my head and I heard nothing with my ears. Yeah, fine, Mack. But even to myself, I sounded like I'd gone 10 rounds with the ghoul. Nah, you sounded much worse after just one round with him, Tens interrupted, and I sighed, tried to find my voice. You gave me another party line, huh? It wasn't really a question, but Delight chose to answer it anyway. From inside the implant. Cheeky bitch. Sure did, sweetie. Typical. When are we going? We're a week out. The last answer was from Mac, and then Doc Oscar came bustling in. Right, the three of you need to get right out of her head and out of here. They went, and I didn't blame them. I wouldn't have wanted to be on the receiving end of that tone of voice either. When the door had closed behind the last of them, Doc turned to me. How do you feel? He asked, and I realized I was lying face down. I pushed myself over onto my side so I could see him. It took me a minute to be able to focus on his face, but I tried for a smile when I succeeded. Hey, Doc, what day is it? Same as it was when you arrived here. Oh, good? He smiled at that. Yes, good. You're recovering quickly. Mac is pleased. Does it matter? Doc raised his eyebrows and then scowled. Of course it matters, you ungrateful imp. You have a mission to prepare for. The more time you have before it, the better prepared you can be. And if I catch you wasting a single second of that time, I'll kick your tail myself. It was my turn to go wide-eyed. I'd never heard him say anything in Mac's defense before. I was both glad and worried by the depth of feeling he'd shown. But before I could say anything, Doc leant down, putting his face close to mine. And if you breathe a word of this to Mac, I will make you wish you hadn't, because I have an entire medical center full of the sharp and pointy, and I'm not as tightly bound by the Hippocratic oath as everyone would like to think. Honestly, if I wasn't still feeling tired from whatever they'd used to sedate me, I might have been afraid. As it was, I just stared at him until he moved back out of my face, and then I stared at him a little bit more. You're going to need to lie back down on your stomach, he said. I have to check the insertion point. I did? He what? Oh, fine, whatever. I rolled back onto my stomach, only flinching a little at his touch on the back of my skull. I listened as he talked about what they'd done. We put this one in the same area that the old one was, and gave us a chance to make sure there hadn't been any seepage. This is healing nicely. I gave it a dose of nanites to speed things along, and dosed the site with some localized painkillers. His fingers moved lightly over my scalp, and I realized I'd lost a bit of hair. Doc was already talking about it. You've got a bald patch, he told me. If you want my advice, I'd say to suck it up and shave the lot off. You can use a wig to change your profile until your hair grows back. Your other alternative is to use the old comb-over trick and arrange what you've got left so it covers the patch. Either method works. He paused, letting me digest it, and then I felt him move away. He started to speak again as I turned slowly onto my side. Personally, I think Mac would miss your hair if you shaved it off. You might want to think about that when you're deciding. Personally? Personally, I thought Doc should mind his own goddamned business. It was my hair, and I'd do with it what I wanted. In fact, I was tempted to shave it all off just because that would give Mac the most shits. At the same time, though, it was kind of cute that Doc thought it would bother Mac if I did, and that he thought enough of Mac to mention the fact. I just wasn't sure what it said about me that I was going to take his suggestion and keep my hair anyway. In the end, I decided not to think about it. I just focused on pushing myself up into a sitting position and keeping what I hadn't eaten for lunch in my stomach. By the time I had a grip on that, Doc was back and offering me a glass of water. You look fine, he said, but there'll be no mats for a week, whether it's to settle a dispute or for training. And you should stay off the range for that long as well. Daggers is fine, but nothing else until I'm sure that implant is settled. Got it? Well, there really was only one answer for that. I did not want Doc mad at me. Ever. Got it. Mac, however, had other plans. You have to familiarize, he snapped, and then repeated the phrase when I insisted he go see Doc. Don't make me take you to the mats, he warned, and I grinned. You're not allowed. Doctor's orders. We'll see about that, he said, and stalked toward medical. I followed at a relatively safe distance. Mac did his usual act of storming into the Doc's terrain uninvited, and Doc did his usual act of reminding Mac where he ended up if things went wrong on a mission. Yeah, in some asshole's custody, Mac retorted, and Doc reached out and smacked him upside the head. And my care, Doc snapped. Or do you want to take that to the mats? The mats, Doc? Aren't you getting too old for that kind of shit? You want to find out? Mac raised his hands in surrender and backed up a step. Not particularly, Doc, he said. I just want to find out if there's any wriggle room in the training restrictions. Which wasn't exactly how he'd phrased it when he'd spoken to me. Doc's response was almost instantaneous. No mats for a month. Funny, I remembered him saying at least a week. Apparently, Mac had been listening in. I thought you said not for a week. I went back over her scans. Frankly, if the mission was something you could put off, I'd be telling you to do that too. As it is, you're going to have to make sure she doesn't get thrown around. Max stared at him in disbelief, and I didn't blame him. I'm pretty sure I was staring at him too. Doc glared at us both. How? We began together, and Doc held up his hand. You have to tell me you'll do your best to not let it happen, or I'll put both of you in stasis until she's fully fit. You're. Max started, but Doc cut him off. No, I'm not. We'll do our best, I said, answering for both of us, and they both stopped staring at each other to stare at me, which I wasn't sure was that much better. What? Doc rolled his eyes and turned back to Mac. I suppose you're going to push it on the firing practice now. Mac ducked his head. She does need to familiarize. Damn it all, I'm right here. They both ignored me and kept staring at each other. Finally, Doc closed his eyes and pinched the bridge of his nose. Fine. 10 minutes at a stretch, once in the morning. I'll do a scan straight after, and then an hour after that, and then 2 hours later. I rolled my eyes and huffed a sigh. Great. More tests. And I meant that in the most unhappy of ways. I was oddly relieved when Doc added, but she practices on her own with only one weapon firing at any one time. At least there wouldn't be an audience if things went wrong. But Mac was still trying to push the training schedule. If those tests come out okay, can we try for 15 minutes in the afternoon? You give it an 8-hour break between shoots, wait for my okay, and then try for a 15-minute stretch, followed by the same testing regime. If everything looks okay, we'll move to 2 30-minute sessions the following day and slowly crank it up thereafter. Done, Mac said, and Doc grimaced, turning away from Mac to whatever he'd been studying on his terminal. Of course, Mac had to try one more time. And you're sure? Get out. But Doc turned his head and glared. Don't make me. Come over there. Mac did a smart about face and left the clinic. I gave the doc a happy grin and started to follow him. Doc's next words wiped the smile from my face. You overdo it, Cutter, and I will make you regret it. Got it, I said, and fled. Mac was smirking when I got out into the corridor. Come on, he said. Tonight you're learning how to take 'em apart and put 'em back together. Tomorrow morning we'll put you on the range. I'm not going to go through just how many times we took those damn sidearms apart, or how many times I dropped something, or even how close I came to throwing something at Mac. You know, like a punch, or a stock, or a cartridge, or maybe just the whole damn gun. I just won't. But Doc's expression stayed fixed in my head, and I did not want to find out exactly how he was going to make me regret overdoing it. For his part, Mac seemed to be keeping the Doc's words in mind too. He kept everything he said related to the process of dismantling and reassembling the weapons I just acquired. There was not one single snark about the amount of time I spent fondling the Zakrava before I followed his instructions, nor did he complain when I made extra sure I could get it apart and back together again. even though he'd wanted to start on the Blazer 54. We went from simple instructions to me racing the clock. Max sent me a time to get the weapon apart and back together again. If I made it, he paid a bounty into my account. I knew how much I owed Odyssey, and I pushed it until I could make his times and then go one better. Again, I said, putting my least favourite toy, the Blazer, down on the table in front of me. I'd made the time and then half the time, and I'd made it to those times 10 times running. My hands were shaking, but I wanted more. The sooner I paid that debt, the sooner I would be free. Again, I said, when Mac did not move. I met his gaze and pressed my hands on the table behind the Blazer, hoping he hadn't noticed the fine tremors running through my fingers. I should have known better than to even try. Mac laid a hand over the nearest one of mine and squeezed it lightly. Not tonight, he said, or Doc will have my hide. I lifted my chin to argue. He'll have your hide as well, Mac added, and I sighed. Fine, I said, but tomorrow? Tomorrow we go to the range, he said, and his tone was final. And while we wait for your scan results, you can race tens, Steppy and me, to see who can do this faster. 100 credits from each of us at the start of each round. Winner gets the pot, 10 rounds, then lunch. It was a fair deal, and I was curious to see which of us was faster. I guess there was more than one way to pass the time. And we need to go over the mission once more. Delight's voice came to us from the doorway. I don't know which of us turned faster. I do know we were both locked and loaded when we did. She gave us a smile designed to irritate and raised one eyebrow. Didn't Doc say no more than one firearm going off at a time? She asked, and I was relieved to see Pritchard appeared behind her and lay a hand on her shoulder. He was her keeper and shadow, a calming influence if the stories were to be believed. He was also responsible for her recruitment if those stories were to be believed. I didn't know whether to be grateful or angry with him, or for what. Delight turned her head and met his gaze. Her smile faded and her lips twisted into a pout. Time to eat, Pritchard said, and flicked a glance to include us. Cook's getting twitchy. Now that was something to be avoided. I looked at Mac and holstered and harnessed my new weapons. Mac did the same, and we turned to the door. Cook also said, no weapons at the table, Pritchard said, and Tan said to tell you Cook is in a mood, whatever that means. A mood, Mac said, and Pritchard nodded. Well, we'd better leave our weapons in our cabins then. He gave Delight a stern look. And that includes you, Agent. We'll meet you there, Pritchard said, and turned away, taking Delight with him. It was an education, and I made a note to dig a little into Pritchard's history. Anyone who could make Delight toe the line had to be someone worth keeping an eye on. Beside me, Mac kept perfectly still until they were out of sight. You will not antagonize that man, he said. He is all that stands between us and insanity. I didn't want to know what Mac meant by that. I really didn't.